Greetings tape shaggers. In this video I'm going to record two short pieces of music with this Fostex 260 Multitracker, a 4-track cassette recorder from about 1986. The purpose of this video is to show somebody who's got one of these how to record with it, and also to give a window into the 4-track workflow for people who don't own this and just want to see what it's like to record on one of these, get some idea of what they sound like. I'll play a short excerpt from two pieces of music that I'm going to be recording later on. After that, there's going to be a long section where I talk through every one of the features on this unit from the point of view of somebody recording with it, and also some of the basic concepts surrounding using a 4-track to record. In post-production, I will have added chapters along the bottom of your screen in the little scroll bar on YouTube, so you can fast forward. But anyway, here's what I will be recording later. Let's just have an overview of what the different controls do. At the bottom here, we've got 4 1/4-inch jack sockets. They're unbalanced and they don't have phantom power. If you're not sure what a 1/4-inch jack socket looks like, it's one of these. It just looks like a guitar cable. So long as, like me, you're going to be using signals that are coming from synthesizers or drum machines, that is line level signals, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, or dynamic microphones, again, we'll talk about the distinction between dynamic microphones and other types of microphone a little bit in a minute, then you shouldn't need any kind of external preamplifier. If you're using ribbon mics which require higher gain, then you might need an external preamp for that reason, or if you're using condenser mic that requires phantom power, then you're definitely going to need an external preamplifier which spits out a line level signal, and then you can just plug it into these sockets here. We've got a punch in out remote control socket over on the right hand side. I'll demonstrate that later. And we've got 2 sockets here for headphones, and you're going to need this kind of headphone socket, this size, same sort of size as the guitar leads or whatever that you plug into these sockets. We can also monitor the sound of the unit from a variety of outputs up here at the top. I'll talk more about them when I get to them, but they're all RCA sockets. RCA sockets are this kind, like you'd put into the back of a stereo. Effectively, we've got a tape recorder and a mixer all in one. You got to think that in a big professional studio, you probably have a desk with loads and loads of channels, and you'd maybe have separate channels just for taking microphones into the tape machine, and another lot of channels that are just for taking the signal off the tape and letting you hear it back through speakers. In order to save space, what is common on units like this is to have a switch which controls whether what the mixer channels are doing is hearing signal coming from the tape or hearing signal coming from synthesizers and microphones that are going to tape. And on this unit, these switches are located here, just above the faders. These are push-push switches, and the up position, that's input. That means that this mixer channel here is acting on the signal that your input to this socket in the bottom left corner. But if you push the button down like that, then this mixer channel is going to act on track 1 of the cassette. One of the bits of terminology that people often get mixed up with is that they use the word channel and track interchangeably. Really, they're not the same thing. Channel means it's part of the mixer, track means it's part of the tape. The tape, if you like, has got 4 threads of sound on it. If you had a Walkman, 2 of them would be printed in this direction. That would be the left and right hand side of your Hootie and the Blowfish tape or whatever, and then Hootie and the Blowfish, or I don't know, maybe you've got the Black Crows on the other side. They'll be in that direction. So side A goes in this way and side B goes this way. And when you're changing side, actually it's the same surface of the tape that's got both bits of information on it, but when you flip the cassette round 180 degrees, you're playing back a different pair of these 4 tracks. The way that this works All 4 of those tracks are printed in the same direction. There is no side B, so if you've got a 60-minute tape, you can only record 30 minutes in that direction. If it was at the normal speed of 1 7/8 inches per second, like a Walkman, it's not. It's double that speed. It's double that speed, so we get better treble response. So in fact, you only get 15 minutes of recording time on this unit on one side of a 60-minute cassette. So it's got 4 tracks on it, and when we push these buttons down, this mixer channel controls tape track 1, this mixer channel controls tape track 2, this mixer channel controls tape track 3, and this mixer channel controls tape track 4. To the right of those buttons we've got mute switches. I'm not going to use them much. I suppose it means you could turn off tracks very suddenly, but I would just tend to do that. I'm going to leave them in the up position, meaning that the mixer channel isn't muted, and I suggest you do the same. The trim controls here set the level of gain that is received by the signals that are coming in on these input sockets. If you've got like quite a loud signal coming out of like a synthesizer or a drum machine, you're going to want to have that turned all the way to the left. And if you've got a dynamic microphone, especially if it's on a quiet sound source, you're going to have that turned most of the way to the right. We call those loud signals that come from drum machines and so on line level, and we call those quieter signals that need more amplification mic level. And so this is ranging from line level to mic level, really. If these input track controls are in input mode, most of the change in gain comes from this red control, but we get finer control using the faders. When we're in track mode, these 4 controls simply create a balance between the 4 tracks that are on the cassette. When these are set to 0, the amount of signal that was coming from the tape is exactly what is received by the output fader. That's the stereo fader. It's linked to the stereo outputs up here. Anything below there, and we're slightly reducing the signal on tape, and we do have the option to add up to 6 decibels of gain by putting the fader in this upper area. Here we've got equalization. If you're really not sure what that means, if you think of a sound like this, that's a low sound, and a sound like this, it's a high sound. So these equalization controls allow you to make the high bit of a sound louder compared to the low bit, or vice versa. It means you can do things like if you've got a microphone that's picking up several parts of the drum kit, maybe it's picking up the cymbals and the kick drum and the snare. Well, the kick drum's low, the snare's somewhere in the middle, and the cymbals are high in frequency. So you can make the perceived balance of cymbal, snare, and kick drum different by using the EQ. Above that, we've got a pan control. What that does is kind of dependent whether we're controlling the track coming from the tape or the input coming from the socket. If we're in track mode, then this is just placing that signal in a stereo field. You've got to think that the way that we place sound in space is dependent on whether sounds are louder in our left ear or our right ear. So with this pan control in the center, we're going to hear that sound equally in both ears. We turn it all the way to the left, we only hear it in the left ear. Turn it all the way to the right, we only hear it in the right ear, or anything in between. There's 2 ways that we can send a signal from the inputs to the tape. One is directly, and it doesn't go through this pan control or this master fader. And then that way, channel 1 of the mixer is going to track 1 of the tape. Channel 3 of the mixer is going to track 3, and so on. There's 1-to-1, 4-to-4 correspondence. But it can be useful to, for instance, make a blend of 4 drum microphones and have a stereo image of those go to only 2 tape tracks, so we have 2 tape tracks open to overdub, say a bass guitar and a synthesizer, for instance. I can set up some of these other switches. I'll show you how to do that later. So a blend of all 4 of those microphones goes to the master fader, and then that will be recorded in these 2 tracks. So long as when I play those back, I pan those channels hard left and right, then I will retain the stereo image that I put on tape. I'm going to come back to how this mix track button beside the pan controls, in combination with these switches and these record arm tracks in the bottom right, work together. It's quite complex and quite unintuitive in my opinion, and so I think it's just better if I demonstrate it once we're actually recording. But I will say that in combination, these switches here, these switches beside these pan controls, and these record input switches determine whether we are recording directly from the input to the tape track or whether we're passing through the pan control and the master output. How you set those switches in combination is also very important when we come to ping-pong recording. Again, we'll see a demonstration of that later. I won't talk about it too much now. An idea that we want to introduce at this point is that we don't always want what the performer playing their instrument hears to be the same as what the cassette hears. And so we want to have what's called a tape cue. That is a separate mix for the performer, which is different to what is being received by the recorder. These auxiliary sends are one of the ways that we can create a separate mixture of sounds for the person recording, but these can also be used to process a sound through an external effects unit. Say I wanted to hook up this pedal and use some reverb. Auxiliary send 1 and 2 are two mono submixes that I could send out to an effect and then bring back into the stereo bus either during tracking or during ping-pong recording or during a final mixdown. Essentially what these knobs do is send a copy of whatever's being processed through these mixer channels. So say I put all these like this, then that blend of these four controls is going to come out of auxiliary send socket here up at the top. I could then bring that back in through the line in here that connects to these controls here, or through the bus in which goes straight to the output fader here. That way I could blend a processed version of that mix with the dry signal that's coming from the faders. Alternatively, these auxiliary blends are going to appear at these aux send sockets here, so I could take a cable here and put that to a separate headphone amplifier or something, a monitor in another room, and then that way I could use this as a submix to give two different people two different mixes of what they're hearing in their headphones as they dub their parts over what's already been recorded. And then up at the top here we've got Monmix. It's just monitor mix. There's a gain level and a separate pan control for each of the four mixer channels. This is another submix, and like the auxiliary sends, we can use it either as a way to give the performers, the talent, a separate mix from what is being received by the recorder, or to send information to an external effects processor so that we can blend a dry, unprocessed and wet processed version of the same sound at the master fader. The difference with this one is that we can actually send stereo information, so it means I can do things like make the reverb picture of my multi-microphone drum kit image similar to but wider or narrower than the dry sound. This is an unusually complex and powerful facility to have in a 4-tracker. It's actually one of the nice things about this unit. Over here, this meter control is a push button. When it's down the way, then we're going to see what's on the 4 tape tracks on the 4 bars. When it's up the way, then numbers 1 and 2 represent the left and right hand side of the signal as it's playing through the output fader and coming out of the stereo out at this socket up here. We can turn the noise reduction on and off with this switch. Here we can control the pitch, that is the speed of the tape player. Usually we want to have it at this middle indented position. There are fun and creative things we can do by recording something slow and then playing it back fast and vice versa. But I think the main reason that the feature was included by the designers is so that you can match instruments at concert pitch and instruments not at concert pitch. The example I always give is, say your grandma's piano isn't at concert pitch, but you've already recorded your band and everyone was using like a digital tuner. What you can do is just change the speed of the recording so the sound of all those concert pitch guitars and basses or whatever is in tune with the piano, record the piano, and then when you put it back to normal speed, everything's in tune still. We can arm all 4 of the tracks on the cassette for recording at the same time, or any combination of them that we like. We've got an Autostop feature, which means that if I turn that on and I rewind, when it gets to 000, it's just going to stop automatically, like that. Now, if I fast forward to, let's say, 23, and I press memory, the little M's going to appear in that screen down there. Then if I go past it and rewind, it should stop at 23 again. So we could set 000, so it's like the beginning of the song, and maybe 23 is the beginning of a chorus where a new part comes in. Here's how punching in would work with the Footswitch. Let's say I've armed track 1. I press play. You can hopefully see the counter is ascending despite the reflection of the light on here. If I cover that up, can you see that number increasing? I hit this. I'm in record mode. Any of these that are armed will be recording. Hit it again and I exit record mode. So I can be strumming away on my banjo, and enter and exit, record at will. Then just hit stop. This is a dual polarity piano sustain pedal. The switch on the bottom is set so that the switch is normally closed when the pedal is up. So depressing this momentarily breaks that circuit. So if you want to check whether a Footswitch you're going to buy is going to work with this unit, it's a Footswitch which is either normally closed or has a two-way switch, so you can choose between normally closed and normally open behaviour that you need. As far as our outputs go here, from left to right, these are the direct tape out. So if you plug RCA cables in here, and you're just getting what's on the tape without it passing through the mixer at all. That's handy if you want to make the recording to cassette using this machine, but then do your mixing in a DAW. As long as you've got a sound card with 4 inputs, you can make 4 separate stem files, 4 wave files, all of exactly the same length. This Monmix pair of RCA sockets is where we send the output of this submixer here. The line in 5 and 6 sockets here go to these controls here, and so we do have gain and pan control about how those signals are reintroduced to the master fader here. Here we've got the stereo out. That's just a duplicate of what's coming out of this fader. It's usually what we would attach to an external recorder, maybe another cassette player, maybe it's a DAW. If you're one of these nerds that records in VHS, attach it to a VHS player. But anyway, whatever your mastering format is, then your stereo mix down is going to come out of those 2 sockets. Left-right monitor. This output duplicates what is coming out of the 2 headphone sockets, and we can control what is heard from those headphone sockets and from that pair of RCA outputs using these buttons here. So there's push buttons to introduce the sound of what's coming from the output fader, and then we could add number 1 and number 2 auxiliary submix separately, and we can add or remove the mono mix. Before we do anything musical with this, I thought it would be a good idea to just clarify what's happening in terms of us monitoring our signal. I think one of the frustrations you can have when you get one of these is you put in a tape and you can't get the sound to come out. So let's address that. You can see up here at the top, I've got speakers that are just off screen plugged into the monitor output. Now I could plug them directly into Monmix, meaning they could only hear this submixer. I could plug one of them into auxiliary send 1 or 2, meaning that I could only hear this submixer or this submixer. I could plug it into the stereo out, and that way what I'm getting out of this fader down here and the combination of these 4 faders was audible. But by plugging it into monitor, I can actually change what is coming out of those sockets and out of the headphone sockets using these 4 buttons along here. The tape I've got in here is Drome and the Brothers Nylon. It's recorded at 1 7/8 inches per second, so it's going to sound really fast. I've got it pitched down, but still a lot faster than it was meant to be, and I'm going to be monitoring track 4, so it's going to be backwards. Remember I was saying that side B of a tape is actually backwards on a conventional cassette. But this is a way for me to press all the buttons and show you how that affects what you're hearing back. Okay, tape's playing now. You can see signal coming on the left and right hand side. If I press this button, then you can see the 4 different tracks that are on the tape. This one's very bright because I fixed it with surface mount LEDs, so it's less distracting if I have it that way. But at the moment we can't hear anything because none of these buttons are pressed in. If I press in stereo, if I pull down the master fader, I can't hear it. If I pull down the individual track, I can't hear it. If I press the mute button, I can't hear it. If I set it to input, I can't hear it. If that stereo button comes up, I can't hear it. Okay. Now if I press mono mix, this up here controls how loud it is, and I can change which speaker it comes out of using the pan control here. If I make auxiliary 1 audible, I can use this control to be able to hear it, and the same signal is going to come out of both speakers or both sides of my headphones. Likewise, if I press auxiliary 2, it's not going to be audible until I turn that up. If we go back to the stereo mix here, I'll just turn that down a bit. If I put this into direct mode, again we can't hear it because it's not passing through that master fader, so that's another way that your sound might cut out. But no, pressing these doesn't make any difference to whether we can hear it through the stereo bus. If we're monitoring through auxiliary 2, they don't matter. Monitoring through auxiliary 1, they don't matter. If we're monitoring through monomix, they don't matter. There are two ways that we can route an input signal from the socket to the cassette, and you decide which of those methods you're using on a per channel basis using these buttons beside the pan controls. The up position is the mix mode, and we'll come to that second, but first of all I'm going to show you the track mode. That is with the button depressed, and in that mode what happens is the output of the fader for this channel goes directly to the corresponding track on the cassette. So if, like me, you're plugged into track number 2, then I will be sending the signal that's coming in on this socket directly to track 2 of the tape. If I engage track mode on channel 1, then I will be sending the input signal coming in on socket 1 to track 1. Channel 3 corresponds to track 3, channel 4 corresponds to track 4. So in this mode, you are limited about which of the 4 tracks you record to. Now, at the moment, the monomix controls down, and so are the auxiliary blends. I've got my bass guitar plugged into the socket, and if I play a note, you can hear it using the camera mic, but you can't hear it out the speakers in the room. If I push down the stereo button and play the bass, again, I can't hear anything. I can't see anything in either mode of the VU meters. And that's because this pan control and this output fader are completely disconnected from this mixer channel. So there's no signal going through the stereo bus at the moment. So I must use either the monitor mix or the auxiliary send to be able to hear my bass. Despite not being able to hear the bass, I can see the signal that would be reaching the tape if I were recording, depending on how I set controls here. And to be absolutely clear, I've got this meter button in the down position where it says recorder. This means if I were playing back the tape, it would be showing me what's on the 4 tracks of the tape. First of all, I need to arm the track, still nothing on the meter, but if I press record once, that's a cue mode where this green light flashes. The signal for the bass is visible on VU number 2. At this stage, really what I'm doing is setting gain. Now, it's not wrong to have the signal hit the tape hard, be up here in the red, but subjectively, you're going to find you like that effect on some signals and not on others. Once we hear this bass guitar, you're going to hear that it's a relatively distorted tone, and for me, that doesn't work well with tape saturation. So I would want it to be sitting between sort of -5 and 0 really. So at the moment that's probably a bit quiet, so I would turn up the fader until it's just peaking a little bit louder and only flashing red very occasionally. If it were a percussion sound, I like how tape saturation affects those sorts of sounds, and so I would be happy to have that signal louder. But to get this audible, we need to use either the monitor mix or the auxiliary mix. So if I make monitor mix audible using this monitor button, remember that although I've got it coming out with speakers in the room from this pair of RCA sockets up at the top, if I were listening on one of the 2 headphone sockets down here at the bottom, then the signal that I was hearing would be the same. So I start to turn this up. It's audible, and I can change how loud or quiet the sound is in the room without changing how much signal is going to reach the tape player when I hit record. Notice that if I use the monitor mix section, as soon as I take this record button out of cue mode, the signal becomes inaudible again. Also, if I disarm the track, I can't hear anything. It must be armed for the signal that's coming in on the input socket to be audible through monitor mix bus. If alternatively we use the auxiliary send to monitor, again I can change the level of that, make it louder or quieter without changing the gain structure. And that's audible provided that the corresponding auxiliary bus button down here in the monitor section. If I uncue the record button with this auxiliary turned up, I can still hear the signal, but it's not getting to tape. Or if I depress this record track button, I can still hear the bass, but look, it's not getting to the tape. So it's possible to confuse yourself about whether the signal is reaching the tape or not when you use the auxiliary send as a monitoring bus. I would suggest that you don't use this to monitor unless you actually want to send several mixes to several performers, because we could send the output of these two rows, this row and this row, to three separate performers during tracking to give them all a completely different blend of what they hear in their headphones without affecting what is received by the cassette player. I would say that unless you're doing that, use the monitor mix bus, and then you're going to be less confused about whether you're recording or not. The second way that we can route a signal from the input socket to the tape is chosen when we have this button in the up position mix mode. And in this mode, the pan control and the output fader are in the picture. And for that reason, these buttons up here, record input, are also going to be important. So I've got track 2 armed with the meters. In mixer mode, the signal is getting past this fader. It's coming from the pan control to the output fader. And so when I turn that pan control, you can see it going between the left and the right meter. When I press down the meter and put it in recorder mode, even though track 2 is armed, I don't see that signal getting through. To be able to see my bass guitar signal reach this meter, which is how I know that it will reach the cassette when I hit record, I need to press record once, so it's flashing green like this. I also need to make sure that these record input switches are agreeing with what I've got set at the track record level. So if I'm recording track 2 is an even number, so this must be panned right, but also this right record input button must be pushed down. Now, I can see that this signal is getting all the way to the tape. You can see that for track 2 I've actually got Monmix turned down, and I'm using the auxiliary control to control the level of the bass. So I can make it louder by turning that up, or quieter by turning that down. Notice if I take this out of record mode, I can still hear the bass, but I can't see it in the meter. If instead I were to monitor this through Monmix, it's not even audible unless I press the record button so it's flashing green. Then I can both hear it and see it on the meter. If for some reason you wanted to record a signal from input number 2 to track number 3, that's possible, but you need to arm the correct record input button. And you may be wondering, why on earth would I want to take the input from socket number 2 and send it to track number 3? And I suppose there might be a situation where you had a broken socket 3, but you still wanted to be able to record on track 3. But the main reason is it allows you to mix a blend of multiple microphone signals to a smaller number of tracks. So I turn up the auxiliary control so I can hear the bass again. It's audible, but it's not reaching track 3. Track 3 is an odd number, so the pan control on my input channel should be set left, and then the record input button for track 3 should be pushed down. At this point, I still can't see that. That's because record button down here isn't flashing green. With that flashing green, now my signal is being routed from channel 2 to track 3. And you could expand this idea to the situation I was talking about earlier in the video, where we might try and record multiple microphones to just 2 tape tracks. Let's imagine we have 4 drum microphones. This one's going to be panned hard left. This one's going to be panned hard right. This one's going to be left of center. And this one's going to be right of center. And we're going to record all of those to tracks 1 and 2. So first thing we need to do is ensure that the record input switch for track 1 is only turned on the left, and the record input switch for track 2 is only turned on the right. Next, we make sure that all our input channels are in mix mode, and we set the pan controls appropriately. Got hard left, left of center, right of center, and hard right. If I set all the faders more or less at the same level, and with the record button pressed once so it's flashing in green, if I turn down the Monmix and the auxiliary send but enable the stereo bus, as I plug my bass into the first, second, third and fourth input, you should be able to see and hear that the signal starts off hard left, then it's left of center as I go into input channel 2, then it's right of center when I go into input channel 3, and it's hard right when I go into input channel 4. Hard left. Left of center. It's louder in the track 1 meter than it was in the track 2 meter. right of centre. It's louder in the track 2 meter than it was in the track 1 meter. Finally, track 4, it's hard right. So you can imagine how we would create a stereo image baked into 2 tracks of the cassette by using the mixer in this way. Over to my right you can see an Akai MPC. When I first got it, I recorded a song. I programmed the drums using some one-shot samples that are included, a synthesized bass part, and then I dubbed over a guitar part using this as a digital audio recorder. And on coming back to the song, I'm actually really into what I did. I'm really into the sounds and by and large the performance of the guitar that's on there. It's quite a complex guitar part just in terms of the amount of stuff I'd need to re-memorize. I can't play it anymore. So rather than just recording the drums, which is what I was planning to do, I'm actually going to record all 4 tracks. That is the left and right hand side of the drum machine to tracks 3 and 4. And then I'm going to record my digital performance of the guitar that I can't remember how to play anymore onto track 1 and the fake bass part onto track 2. And then what I'll do is I'll learn the bass part, which is a bit more manageable, and dub over it with an actual bass guitar on track 2, and that'll allow me to show you the overdubbing process. The stereo bus is enabled in the monitor section, so if I press play and bring up these faders we should hear the drums. And then the bass is on fader 2. And the guitars on track 1. I should note, by the way, that that sound is just being picked up by the camera mic. Later on, when I actually record it, I'll hook this up in such a way that I'm recording it off screen with my Zoom handy recorder. That way you'll get a very clear representation of the sound coming out of it. But for now, while I'm talking, it's just camera mic sound that you're hearing. Now, if I want to monitor the inputs, I press record once. What I want to do is send channel 1 to track 1, channel 2 to track 2, channel 3 to track 3, and channel 4 to track 4. So what I want to do then is press these track buttons here, and if I press play, for one thing we can't hear it in the monitor bus anymore, and for another, that guitar, although it sounds like the right blend in the room, it's going to tape really quiet, whereas this drum machine is going there really hot. So this is where having those separate mixes, where we, the monitoring engineer or performer or whatever, hear a different mix to what the tape player sees is important. The monitor mix is post fader, so I want to adjust the fader level so I'm getting the right level to tape first before I create a monitor mix. So I want these to be, above -3 dB anyway. So I'm just gonna lift the fader until those are peaking in the right places. If the transients of the drums hit the tape hard, that's okay. I'm just gonna get a little bit of tape saturation, and usually I like that effect. Now that these faders are in the right place, I can start to make a mix on the monitor mix. If I take that out, I could also make a mono blend using auxiliary 1. If I cut that out, I could use auxiliary 2 to do the same thing. It's also important that we press record on its own so that this green light is flashing, otherwise we wouldn't see these signals going to tape. If I press that again, nothing. We enter record mode by playing record and play together. The red light goes solid. Now I can play from the start and make my recording of the output of the MPC. Off screen there, I realised that the tape that I was using didn't actually have enough space on it, so I've slightly changed the levels. I've just made the recording. I've got a different tape in there. So I can now unarm these, unplug my input sockets here, and power off my MPC to show that the signal is coming from the tape recorder and not from the MPC. Pull down all the faders, make sure that's the stereo bus that we're listening to. Press play, turn up the master fader. Let's see if we've got some drums here. We need to put these back into mix mode. this in mixer mode. I'm just going to turn that down so it's a little bit quieter. So we've got our drums here. I can make that stereo image mono by putting those in the center position. Here's the bass on its own, the fake bass that I'm going to replace. I can move it across the stereo image using the pan control now. May not be apparent the stereo imaging, because again this is getting picked up by the camera mic. Here's the guitar. So I can start doing things like EQing that if I wanted. To be honest, I like the sound, so I'm just going to leave it where it is. So next thing I'll do is go away and learn how to play that bass part so I can dub over it with a nicer bass sound than that. So off screen I've got my electrical audio bass, and I'm plugged into a little array of pedals to simulate the sort of amp tone that I like. Which is something like that. I've practiced the part enough that I'm probably not going to make any kind of catastrophic mistakes. I'm sure I could get better at it, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm sort of ready. This time I'm going to have the mix button for the channel that I'm recording up, and I'm going to monitor it using the auxiliary send. So you can see I've got the aux send turned up and the corresponding fader turned up to 0, since this is a post fader control the auxiliary send. However, I'm monitoring the other tracks using Monmix. If I were to monitor them using the auxiliary send, I would have to turn them up in the stereo mix, which would mean if I'm in mix mode, as I am now, the signals from the other tracks would get bounced. Here we go, wish me luck. Okay, that take went well. Let's rewind back, hear how it's sounding. I think that's okay, let's hear how it sounds in context. I think that sounds alright. If I was being like really fastidious about it, I probably would try and get as good a take again with slightly less gain. Anyway, we can move on to trying to process what we've got with some effects pedals. I've tried to set up these two effects pedals with the 260 in a way which is both flattering to the music that I just recorded, but also demonstrates the capabilities of this unit well. So what I've got for the bass is from the mono mix, the left hand side only of it is going into the mono input on this Zoom multi-stomp pedal. The whole reverb is 100% wet, and I've set the decay length so it fits nicely with the length of the notes in the song. That's coming out in mono, only the left hand side of this pedal. It does have a right hand side, but I don't need it for this. That's coming back in on line in number 5, which corresponds to this pan control and this gain control here. I'm turning the line in all the way up and then using the pan control to put it hard left, whereas the bass signal itself is only slightly left of centre. The effect that we should hear therefore is if these are the confines of our stereo image, the bass is appearing just off to the centre here and dry, but there's a sort of delayed hall-like reverberation here, as though we had a separate mic in a hall picking that up and a dry mic close to the bass cabinet here. Let's play that back. That's it dry. If I put in the whole reverb. Very exaggerated like that, I think about there. Sounds good and works in the mix. For the drums, I'm sending the signal out using the auxiliary sends, number 1 and 2. That's going to the left and right input on this zoom pedal, which has a stereo input. That's going into a chamber reverb. Again, the mix is 100% wet, and I've adjusted the decay and the tone so that they're flattering both the tempo of the song and the sound of the drum kit. Those signals are coming in on just the bus in, so they're joining the stereo bus without any fader or anything in between. So in this case, I need to rely on the zoom pedal itself being loud enough, which it is, so it's fine. Wet. Dry. I think there works. Now if I bring everything in, the moment we're monitoring the left-right output, you can hear it's distorting those speakers very slightly. I'll just pull down the master fader a little bit. And when I press stop, you can hear some of the reverberation dying off. So I might just make those reverbs a little bit subtler, and then I'm going to record the stereo output of the 260 by plugging my Zoom H6 handy recorder into the stereo out. So in a second, what you're going to hear is a digital capture of the output of this, not the camera microphone. So that should give you a clearer picture of how the 260 sounds. Here we go. On to the next thing, which will be recording some live drums onto tracks 1, 2, 3, bouncing them in mono to track 4, and then overdubbing over that. I have gone away and recorded a 16-bar drum part. I'm using a variation of the Glyn Johns drum technique where you have 3 mics on the drum kit. One high up above the cymbals, immediately above the snare, one off the side of the floor tom, one in front of the kick drum, right down low. I haven't filmed that process just because it's really repeating steps we've already covered. What I'm interested in is the drum bounce. So I'm at a stage now where on mixer channel 1 I have the microphone above the snare drum, mixer channel 2 is the one that's at floor level on the kick drum, number 3 that's the one that's off the side of the floor tom. And you can see that I've added some EQ to these. I'm bringing out 10k for the overhead, I'm bringing out maybe 8 or 9k and the one that's off to the floor tom, whereas I'm slightly emphasizing around 1.3k on the kick drum, and I'm bringing up about 160 hertz a little bit there, whereas I'm pulling out quite a lot of the same frequency on the microphone that's set above the snare, and I'm pulling out a slightly lower frequency, more like 100 hertz for the floor tom. So I'll play you what it sounds like dry first of all, bearing in mind this is just one speaker because it's all panned hard right, I'll explain why in a minute, being picked up by the camera mic. As I was playing that back, I think what you probably saw is that the levels to tape were below 0, but for the kick drum mic I let the signal go into the red a little bit and just sort of act almost as a limiter on the big kick drum hits. If I put these levels back up to where they were and press play again, if I have that flashing green, this is what the combination of these 3 channels in mono hitting track 4 looks like. You can see it's flashing into the red again. So now that I'm in the bouncing process and I can, do this bounce as many times as I like until the sound that I get here on track 4 is pleasing to me, then I'm going to experiment with adding some more tape compression. So you can see at the moment it's occasionally hitting plus 3 dB, even plus 5 dB. So I'm probably going to bounce like that and see how that sounds, whether I like the extra compression and distortion there. So let's talk about that routing. Because I'm recording track 4, the track 4 record input right switch needs to be pushed down. I direct the signal that's coming from the tape, so you can see these buttons here are set in track mode, through these mixer channels and going to track 4 of the tape. So I need to pan these hard right, and these 3 controls are up in the mix mode. Channel 4 is also up and in the mix mode, and the right button is pushed down. A couple of things to notice here. You can set the overall gain of the tape saturation using the master fader. Notice that channel 4, moving this pan control didn't make any difference to the amount of gain that's been hit by tape. If I rewind this back again and then pan these hard left, you'll see that no signal hits track 4 until I pan them right again. So let's recap that. For the source, you need to be coming from track. It must be in mix mode. If you've got an individual track recorded, then you must be hard panned to match whether it's an odd or even number. The track that is armed, the record input button must be armed. If it's an odd number, you'd arm the left button. If it's an even number, you'd arm the right button. The output fader does make a difference. That's how you bounce. Extra thing I'm doing in this process is I'm going to add some reverb to the drum. So if I rewind that again, what you're going to see is this Zoom multi-stomp, I've got 100% wet chamber reverb on it. The cable that's plugged in there is a variation of one of these where it's got 1/4" jack sockets at one end and RCA sockets at the other. And what I'm doing is using the red side as one cable and the white side as another cable. Well, it's black in the case of this one. So the red output is coming from auxiliary send 1 and going into the left. That is the mono input of this pedal because it does have a stereo input and output, this pedal. And then the output from the pedal is coming from there and entering back in on line in, and the left hand side of that is called number 5, which corresponds to these two controls here. I've got it panned hard right so I can record the reverb as part of the bounce. You can see at the moment it's turned way down, but if I dial it in you'll start to hear the drums become more ambient. To dry. I think it sounds good about there. Okay, so we're going to rewind back again. This time we'll actually make the bounce, pressing play and record at the same time. So let's monitor that back and just prove that it's not going through the pedal anymore. We will unplug that at the top here. It's completely disconnected. You can see I've got these tracks down. I've turned up track 4. Let's hear back what we bounced. I could now EQ the whole thing if I wished. Place it in stereo field. I hope you can hear that going from my right to my left. I want to add some more. A subtle EQ like that sounds alright. I'll leave it in the centre. Yeah, so I'm happy with what the tape compression has done to it. I will now overwrite these 3 tracks with overdubbed parts. So off screen, I've overdubbed my other parts. On track 1, I have guitar. On track 2, I have bass. And on track 3, I have Rhodes piano. I've created a bit of a balance, set up a basic stereo image, added a little bit of EQ in the tracks. I could of course go into a lot more detail with this if I captured the output from the tape outs into a digital audio workstation or similar. Adding more effects via the monitor mix or auxiliary send buses at this stage is also possible. I'm not doing that. But what you will be hearing this time is coming from the digital recorder, the Zoom H6, which is just out of shot here. So it'll give you some representation of the sort of quality of sound that's captured on the cassette here. And there we have it, folks. And come to the end of the video. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you found that fun and informative. Bear in mind that liking and sharing is caring. It helps project my silly wee hands and weirdly comprehensible Scottish voice into the ether where it can germinate in the minds of the tape shaggers. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you again soon.